I never imagined a homeowners association would come knocking on my door. Not out here. Not on 30 acres of rugged hillside where the only rules I cared about were the ones nature laid down. But trouble has a way of showing up where you least expect it, and when it didn't come politely. It came dressed up in glossy letterheads, fake smiles, and the kind of neighborly requests that carried threats tucked between every line. It was late afternoon when I found the first letter. The sun was dropping behind the ridge, painting the pines gold, and I'd just come back from running a survival training session with a couple of students. My boots were still dusty. My dog Ranger was trotting at my side, tongue hanging out, when I reached into the mailbox. The envelope had this strange weight to it, like it didn't belong on a gravel road mailbox with chipped paint. It had embossing, raised ink with the name Greenstone Trail Homeowners Association. I wasn't part of their little gated world. I didn't share their manicured sidewalks or their rules about grass height. But there it was, signed by one Karen Rutland, president. She asked if I'd consider allowing her community to use my private back road a few nights a month. She called it regional synergy. I remember standing there, letter in hand, hearing nothing but the cicadas buzzing in the trees and thinking, what the hell does that even mean? I gave a polite no, typed it up clean and clear. My land wasn't zoned for public use, and I wasn't about to risk lawsuits because some kid tripped during a glow-stick hike. I thought that was the end of it, but Karen, she wasn't the type to hear no. She was the type to hear a challenge. The next letter wasn't neighborly. It was a demand wrapped in pastel paper. She included an access agreement, legal terms scrawled out, indemnity clauses, and a sticky note that read, "Let's be neighborly." I didn't respond this time. I sent her attorney a formal notice, highlighted parcel maps, laminated deed copies, proof, paper armor. I thought if I gave them enough black and white evidence, they'd back off. That's when the weird little things started. A timber delivery for one of my students never made it up the road. The driver called me confused, embarrassed, said some security guy at a checkpoint turned him away. A checkpoint on my land. I went to the county records the next morning. My road was still mine. No easements, no changes, nothing, but it felt like someone was moving chess pieces when I wasn't looking. Then the complaints started. Anonymous reports to the county, noise violations, tax delinquencies, unregulated tactical training. None of it stuck, but each one left a sour taste. And then the SUVs showed up, unmarked, parked near my ridge line, men with telephoto lenses pretending to be surveyors. When I pressed them for paperwork, they stammered and finally admitted they'd been sent by the HOA. That's when I let Ranger off the leash. His growl did the talking for me. For a while it all went quiet. That's the part that unsettled me most, the silence. No letters, no trucks turned away, no men on the ridge, just quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't settle the heart but tightens it. I knew it wasn't over. Trouble doesn't just stop, it regroups. And then came the Tuesday afternoon I'll never forget. I'd just driven back from town with supplies. The heat of the Georgia sun was still hanging heavy in the air, thick with dust that clung to your throat. I turned off the county road onto my access road like I had 100 times before. But this time, the crunch of gravel under my tires wasn't the only sound. I slowed down because something gleamed across the road. A barricade, bright silver, retractable, brand new. Behind it, a prefab guard shack, generator humming, cameras mounted, and a flag flapping, an HOA flag on my land. I thought maybe I was hallucinating from the heat, but then he stepped out. Young kid, early 20s. Tactical pants, shades, radio clipped to his vest. His shirt had stone-sec security stitched on it. He held up a hand like I was supposed to stop. "Afternoon, sir," he said like he was rehearsing. "This road is now managed by Greenstone Trail HOA. You can either present an HOA access pass or pay the toll." The sign next to him read, "Private road, HOA access required, toll $40. I stared at him, my hands still on the steering wheel. Not angry, not yet, just stunned. It was like someone had built a border crossing to a foreign country overnight, and I was suddenly the outsider. My road, my land, and they wanted me to pay a toll just to get to my own house. I rolled the window down, the hot air pressing in like a wall. My voice came out steady, calm, but hard enough to cut through the buzzing of the generator. "This is my road," I told him. "It's registered in my name, county parcel A1724, not part of your HOA, and you're standing on it." The kid didn't flinch. He nodded like he'd been trained for this exact conversation. "Sir, I understand your frustration, but according to temporary authorization, the HOA has been granted interim control of this road segment. You can file a grievance with the association or pay the toll." He even smiled when he said it, like he thought that line would end the conversation. I reached into the glove box, pulled out my laminated parcel map, the one I always kept handy for people who didn't understand boundaries. I held it up so he could see the lines. I tapped the border with my finger. "This road," I said, "is mine, deeded, maintained, not yours, not theirs, not anyone else. Now I'm going to need you to lift that gate." He tilted his head, lenses reflecting the glare of my truck's hood. "Sir, I can't do that without proper clearance. I'm just doing my job." The words hit me harder than they should have. I'd heard that phrase before overseas from kids in uniform who had no idea what they were being ordered into. But this was different. This was a rented guard on a gravel road in Georgia, my gravel road. I put the truck in park, killed the engine, and stepped out. Gravel crunched under my boots. Ranger hopped out after me, circling low, sensing my mood. I held the parcel map in one hand like it was gospel and walked up to the barricade. "This is the part," I said, looking him dead in the eye, "where I ask you nicely one time to move the barricade before this becomes a police matter." I gave him a chance. I wanted him to back down, but he made the mistake. Instead of stepping back or reaching for his radio, he reached for me. His hand grabbed the front of my shirt like he thought I was some drunk at a football game. Big mistake. I didn't even think about it. It was muscle memory. I pivoted, drove my elbow into his ribs, hooked his leg with mine, and put him flat on his back in the gravel. His sunglasses flew one way, his radio another. He wasn't out cold, but he was close enough to it that he lay groaning, clutching his side. I bent down, unhooked the key card from his vest, and walked to the barricade. One swipe, one beep, and the silver bar lifted smooth as butter. I got back in my truck, eased forward, and stopped just past the booth. The kid was sitting up, stunned, trying to piece together what just happened. I didn't feel good about it, but I didn't feel bad either. I'd warned him. Hell, I'd practically given him a tutorial on how not to get dropped on a dirt road. By the time I pulled up to my cabin, the adrenaline had cooled into something sharper, clarity. This wasn't an accident. They didn't build that barricade overnight without planning. They didn't hire a guard without funding. They wanted a fight, and they just declared one. I pulled out my phone and hit record on a voice memo. I logged everything, time, date, location, details. Then I uploaded the dash cam footage to the cloud. By the time I parked, I had a folder on my desktop labeled HOA Assault Day 1. And then I made the call. Picked up on the first ring. "I was hopping, this was you," he said. "They've escalated," I told him. "Physical barricade, hired security, one of them grabbed me." There was a pause, the kind where you can hear a man's brain shift gears. "Do you have footage?" "Everything, dash cam, voice memo, photos. You're going to want to see the signage." "I really do," he said. His tone had that edge now, lawyer mode, the kind that meant he smelled blood. "Send me everything. This isn't just civil anymore. We're moving into criminal territory." I emailed him the files that night. He called back within the hour, and his voice carried the weight of certainty. "They're screwed," said flatly. "This isn't just trespassing. This is false imprisonment, unlawful obstruction, and potentially assault by a hired agent. Tomorrow morning, I'm filing notice of intent to sue." I leaned back in my chair, staring out the window at the tree line, the shadows stretching long in the evening light. I could still hear the hum of that damn generator down the road, faint but steady. "They're not done," I said quietly. "You expecting more?" "I know more is coming. You don't build a barricade like that as your first move. That was the opening act." And I wasn't wrong. 2 days later, I spotted movement near the southern property line, the edge that ran along the HOA's upper trail loop. 3 men in khaki vests, hard hats, clipboards. They stopped every few feet, jotting notes, one of them holding a meter, another fiddling with what looked like a drone controller. Surveyors, or at least, that's what they wanted to look like. I grabbed my ATV and rolled down the trail toward them. Gravel spit under the tires. As soon as they saw me coming, they froze. Not like professionals caught mid-job, but like kids caught stealing candy. "You lost," I called out, pulling up. The oldest one stepped forward, mid-30s, thin build, cheap sunglasses sliding down his nose. "Afternoon, sir. We're conducting an environmental assessment on behalf of the Greenstone Trail Homeowners Association." "On my land." He hesitated. "Technically, this area falls under disputed jurisdiction due to proximity to HOA property and concerns of cross-boundary environmental impact." "That's a long way of saying we're trespassing." I cut him off. "Unless you've got a court order or a county inspection warrant signed by a judge, you're trespassing. You've got 30 seconds to turn around and hike back to wherever Karen sent you." My hand rested on my belt, not on my weapon, just near it. Enough. They got the message. They stammered something about baseline data, but none of them could meet my eyes. They left quick, their boots crunching the dirt like they couldn't get away fast enough. I followed them to the boundary, waited until they were gone, and then pulled out my phone. I said when he answered, "They just tried to run a fake environmental inspection on me." He wasn't surprised. His voice was steady, almost amused. "Classic HOA playbook. They file a fake report, then try to drag you into regulatory hell, but we're not playing defense this time. We're flipping the script." That's when I realized this wasn't just about a barricade anymore. This was a war of attrition. And Karen, she wasn't just poking, she was laying traps. When said he'd flipped the script, I didn't realize how fast he meant. Within 48 hours, he had a pair of real scientists from a state-certified consulting firm standing on my property. Not clipboard cowboys in khaki vests, but actual field experts with credentials, badges, and equipment that didn't look like it was bought off eBay. They came early in the morning, the mist still hanging low over the tree line. I offered them coffee, black and bitter from my old percolator, and they got straight to work. Soil samples, water tests from my rain barrels and runoff creek, air quality monitors humming on tripods. They didn't just glance around, they worked like people who understood that every number, every reading could stand in front of a judge one day. I watched from the porch, rangers stretched out at my boots, the cicadas starting their morning song. It struck me then how absurd this had become. Here I was, a man with a vegetable garden, a solar rig, and a composting toilet, being accused of running a chemical weapons dump. All because one HOA president wanted to grab a little more land. By the afternoon, the scientists had their results. They walked back up to the porch, papers in hand, and one of them, older, sharp-eyed, gave a half smile. "Mister, your property is clean. Very clean. No hazardous materials, no contamination, nothing even close to a violation." Relief wasn't the word. It was more like vindication, a confirmation of what I already knew but needed written down in ink. Then the kicker came. The scientist flipped to the last page of his report and tapped a highlighted section. "However," he said, "we did find something concerning, not on your land, on theirs." He explained that the HOA, in their eagerness to expand their walking trails, had illegally removed part of a natural drainage buffer the year before. Their little project cut straight into a protected wetland zone. That trail extension, it was actively damaging the watershed. The irony hit me so hard I laughed. They tried to paint me as a hazard, and in the process, they shined a spotlight on their own mess. By evening, had the report in his inbox. I could practically hear him grinning through the phone. "They accused you of polluting, Brad," he said, "but they're the ones draining into a protected wetland. Oh, this is gold. We're adding it to the suit. Inspection, misuse of county resources, and now environmental violations. She's digging her own grave." I thought about Karen that night, the woman I'd never met in person, who signed her letters warmest regards with enough venom between the lines to kill a bull. I imagined her sitting at her polished HOA desk, rehearsing her fake smiles while orchestrating her schemes, believing paperwork and procedure would protect her. She had no idea she'd just handed me the rope. But quiet victories in a fight like this are dangerous. They make you think maybe the storm has passed. It hadn't. A week later, before the ink was dry on the environmental report, I woke to the low growl of heavy machinery. At first, I thought it was one of my neighbors getting gravel delivered. But when I stepped outside, the sound was wrong. Too steady, too close. I grabbed a thermos of coffee, pulled on my boots, and climbed onto the ATV. Ranger followed, ears pricked, sensing my unease. The sound grew louder as I descended toward the county line. When I rounded the bend, I had to blink twice to believe it. 2 backhoes, a dump truck, and a bulldozer sat on my road, engines rumbling. A crew of 5 men in bright orange vests were cutting into the shoulder like they owned the place. One guy waved a clipboard, barking orders. I parked the ATV and stepped off slow, coffee in hand. "Morning," I said, my voice carrying over the roar of engines. "Mind telling me why you're tearing up my road?" The foreman, a grizzled man with 50 years of sun on his face, looked up like I was interrupting his lunch. "We're here for scheduled improvements. Road widening and resurfacing project. Approved by the County Infrastructure Board." "Approved by who exactly?" I asked. He held up paperwork, official seals, stamps, signatures. Project GSD CR 112, initiated at the request of Greenstone Trail HOA, funded under Municipal Improvement Matching Grant. You should have received a notice. I took the papers and scanned them. They looked real. They smelled real, but something was off. "This road isn't public," I said flatly. "This is parcel A1724, my land. HOA has no jurisdiction here." The foreman frowned. "That's not what the authorization form says." "Let me guess," I said, flipping through the packet. "The request was submitted by one Karen Rutland." He gave a slow, cautious nod. I smiled, not because it was funny, but because it was exactly what I expected. She was doubling down. "Wait here," I told him. I climbed back on the ATV and sped to the cabin. My hands were steady, my mind clear. I grabbed my documentation folder. Originals, notarized survey maps, certified deeds, and an affidavit had filed weeks ago with the county clerk confirming no easement existed on my road. Paper armor thicker than steel. When I came back, the bulldozer was warming up. Its exhaust coughed smoke into the morning air. I stepped in front of it, both hands raised, documents clutched like scripture. "Shut it down," I ordered. The driver leaned out, a young guy with mirrored shades and a Bluetooth earpiece. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to move." "No, son," I said, voice steady as a rifle barrel. "I'm going to ask you to stop before you commit felony trespass and vandalism on recorded property." He hesitated, smirked like he thought I was bluffing. That's when I turned and pointed at the trees. 2 trail cameras, red infrared lights blinking, recording everything. "I've already contacted the county commissioner and the sheriff's office," I added. "Scratch 1 inch of gravel, and I'll file criminal charges against every single man here." The foreman came back over, clipboard drooping in his hand. He read my documents, jaw tightening. After a long pause, he sighed, pulled out his phone, and paced while he made the call. 5 minutes later, he came back and muttered, "Shut it down." Engines died. The bulldozer hissed to silence. The trucks backed up. In less than 20 minutes, the crew was retreating, leaving muddy tire tracks and half-unrolled erosion mesh flapping in the dirt. I stood there, arms crossed, watching them vanish like a retreating army. Ranger sat at my side, ears forward, tail still. The moment the last truck disappeared around the bend, I pulled out my phone and dialed. "They just tried to start roadwork with county money," I said. "On my land." "You're kidding." "Nope, they used forged documents to do it, too." Whistled low. "Brad, that's misuse of public funds, filing false grant requests, abuse of authority, attempted property damage. We're not in the shallow end anymore. Send me everything. Pictures, copies, video." I looked down at the churned-up gravel and the abandoned roll of mesh still dangling on the roadside. My jaw tightened. "You'll have it in an hour," I said. "Just tell me we're close to ending this." "Oh, we're getting there," said. His voice carried that dangerous smile of a man who knew the tide was turning. "But something tells me Karen's not done writing her obituary yet." The thing about people like Karen Rutland is they never act alone. They move like spiders, delicate at the center but connected to a dozen invisible threads. By the time you see the web, you're already caught. The morning after the roadwork stunt called me with a tone I hadn't heard from him before. Not just sharp, not just hungry. This was different. It was the sound a lawyer makes when he smells rot under fresh paint. "Brad," he said, "I dug deeper on Karen, public records, court filings, real estate databases. You're not her first target." "What do you mean?" "She's pulled this exact scheme before." I sat on the porch with my coffee, the dawn mist burning off the ridge. Ranger was chasing squirrels through the brush, and I remember thinking how peaceful it looked, but's words cut through the quiet. 2 years ago outside Austin, he continued, she was president of another HOA. Redwood Cove, same setup, quiet little community on the edge of ranch land. She tried to annex a 5-acre horse farm. Forged a community access clause into the charter, filed it with the county herself, even brought in a survey team to redefine boundaries. I felt my jaw tighten, and the farmer fought it. Lawsuit was filed. But before it reached trial, Karen resigned overnight and disappeared out of state. The HOA settled quietly. Case closed. She got away with it. Not this time, said. Not with the evidence you've got. Not with her fingerprints on half a dozen fraudulent filings. This isn't just a nuisance suit anymore. This is conspiracy. I leaned back, the wood of the porch chair creaking under me. A woman who'd never spoken to me face-to-face was orchestrating the same playbook across state lines, hopping from one HOA kingdom to another like some suburban warlord. That afternoon, another letter appeared at my gate. Not mailed, hand-delivered. HOA letterhead, red ink stamped urgent, the kind of theatrics you'd expect from someone running out of moves. I unfolded it right there at the mailbox. To Mr. Bradley, due to ongoing legal uncertainties regarding parcel A1724, the Greenstone Trail Homeowners Association has voted to suspend all informal courtesy privileges associated with adjacent properties. In light of Mr.'s unwillingness to cooperate with regional land integration policies, his property shall be considered a pending neutral zone until final determination is reached. Signed, of course, respectfully, Karen Rutland, President. I laughed out loud. Neutral zone. Like I was running my own micronation, I scanned it, sent it to. His reply came fast, "This is bonkers, but legally useful. Proves intent to isolate and discredit you." Classic pattern. Pattern, that word stuck with me, because people like Karen don't just push, they document. They leave trails believing paperwork will shield them, but paper cuts both ways. And then the real break came, from a place I didn't expect. His name was Joe Carter, mid-30s, HOA board member, accountant. We'd never spoken before, he always kept his head down at meetings. But now, out of nowhere, he asked to meet. We stood at the edge of the tree line near my old deer blind, the air still and heavy. He kept glancing over his shoulder like he expected drones buzzing overhead. His voice shook when he finally spoke. "I can't keep quiet anymore. She's gone too far." "How far is too far?" I asked. Joe swallowed hard, then handed me a folder. Inside were internal emails, scanned documents, and something more valuable than gold. "She forged the HOA vote," he whispered. "There was no board approval for the barricade, the inspections, the road work, none of it. She signed it all herself, even amended the charter without telling us." At the top of the stack was the smoking gun. A timeline drafted on Karen's personal letterhead titled, "Integration Plan, Final Phase." I read it under the fading light. Step by step, she'd outlined everything. The barricade, the environmental inspections, the construction funding, even the PR campaign to pressure the county into reclassifying my land as shared access buffer. At the bottom, she'd penciled in a potential resale value if the property was successfully absorbed. I looked up at Joe. "You realize this puts her in deep water." "I know," he said. His face was pale, but his voice steady. "I'm done covering for her." "You ever testify in court before?" He shook his head. "You're about to." That night I handed the folder to. His grin could lit up the Appalachian Trail. "We've got her," he said. This isn't just civil anymore. This is fraud, coercion, conspiracy to commit land theft. She's cooked. And yet, while sharpened the knife, Karen was still smiling in her HOA newsletters, still preaching regional harmony and community unity. She probably thought her web would hold, that her threads were strong enough to strangle the truth. But the silence around her was shifting. Board members who once stood behind her were suddenly absent. County officials who once dodged our calls were finally answering. And Karen, well, people like her don't retreat. They escalate. When the walls close in, they don't surrender. They light a bigger fire and hope the smoke blinds everyone. 3 days after filed the expanded lawsuit, fraud, forgery, conspiracy, the phone rang. Unmarked number, I let it go to voicemail. It rang again and again. Finally, I picked up. "Mister," the voice said, "this is Sergeant with the Walker County Sheriff's Department. We've received a request for an immediate welfare check on your property. Claims of weapons stockpiling, threats to neighbors, armed insurgency-style drills. Are you available to speak with us now?" I closed my eyes, counted to 3. "How many cars did you bring?" There was hesitation. "We've got 3 units en route. ETA 5 minutes. One of our deputies is already nearby." I looked out over the ridge, and there, just cresting the hill, came the first flicker of blue lights, tires crunching on gravel, doors slamming. And standing behind the lead car, her pastel suit gleaming in the afternoon sun, folder clutched like a holy book, was Karen Rutland herself. The spider was stepping into her own web. Blue lights flashed across the tree line, scattering the crows from the ridge. Tires crunched against gravel as 3 sheriff's cruisers rolled up, engines low, steady, like they were approaching a standoff. The air was thick, heavy with that storm-before-the-storm silence. Ranger's ears were pinned back, his growl low and constant. I stepped toward the gate, calm but alert. Years in uniform teach you one thing above all. When authority rolls in hot, you don't posture, you don't bluff. You stand your ground, steady, and let truth carry its own weight. The lead cruiser door opened, and out stepped Sergeant. Tall, steady eyes, the kind of man who didn't like being dragged into HOA theatrics but had to play his role. And right behind him, dressed like she was walking into a boardroom, was Karen Rutland. Pastel suit, perfect bob haircut, folder clutched tight against her chest like it was evidence of a war crime. "This is the man," she said immediately, pointing at me like I was a criminal caught red-handed. "He's running unsanctioned combat training operations. He has weapons stockpiled. There are dozens of armed men up here. We've received credible reports of extremist activity." Her voice was sharp, rehearsed, like she'd been waiting for this stage all along. I kept my tone even. "Credible reports from whom?" Karen's eyes narrowed. "Anonymous tip lines and HOA surveillance." I almost laughed. "You mean the cameras you illegally mounted on my pine trees?" That shut her up for a beat. I turned to Sergeant and handed him my folder: county certifications, range permits, business license, environmental clearance reports. Every line signed, stamped, and notarized. Paper armor. He scanned them in silence while Karen fidgeted beside him, her pastel jacket twitching like it was 2 sizes too small. And then I played the ace. From my pocket, I pulled a flash drive. "Here's dash cam footage from last week," I said. "Includes the barricade your HOA set up, the fake guard who grabbed me, and the construction crew they hired to tear up my road with documents. It's all time-stamped, all uploaded to cloud storage." Raised an eyebrow. "Assault." "Oh yeah," I said calmly. "He grabbed me, I defended myself, you'll see it all on camera." He stepped back toward his cruiser, plugged in the drive, and began watching. Karen tried to keep her composure, but her words spilled out faster now, desperate. "You can't possibly think he's the victim here," she snapped. "Look around you, tactical gear, military weapons. He teaches maneuvers to armed men. This is how militias start." "I teach law enforcement, ma'am," I said, steady as ever. "And judging by the looks of it, they're better trained than your entire board." At that, 2 deputies who'd been with me earlier in the week stepped forward, arms folded, quiet but supportive. One gave the faintest nod, enough to remind Karen she wasn't the only one with witnesses. Returned from the cruiser, his face unreadable. But then he spoke, and the weight in his voice shifted the whole field. "Miss Rutland," he said formally, "we've reviewed the footage. Your claims are inconsistent with the evidence. The only physical aggression came from your hired guard." Karen's mouth opened, but no words came out. For the first time, she looked cornered. "We may need to investigate your office for filing a false report," added. "For now, I suggest you return home and consult legal counsel." The pastel mask cracked. She flushed red, her voice breaking into a high-pitched shriek. "He's waging a war against the HOA. He's dangerous. He's got traps and dogs and—" "Ma'am," one deputy interrupted calmly, "you're describing rural life." The silence that followed was heavy, almost comical. Even the cicadas seemed to pause, letting the weight of those words sink in. Karen sputtered but turned his back, motioning his deputies to stand down. The cruisers idled, engines humming, but the confrontation was already over. Karen stormed off toward her car, folder clutched tight, muttering under her breath about conspiracies and dangerous men. But the authority she'd tried to weaponize had slipped right through her fingers. The sheriff's department wasn't her tool anymore. It was her liability. As the cruisers pulled away, I stood there in the settling dust, Ranger at my heel, my pulse steady. I'd expected escalation. I hadn't expected her to gamble this big, this fast. And I hadn't expected her to lose in front of her own audience. That night I sat on the porch with a glass of bourbon, listening to the night sounds, the creak of the gate in the wind, the owls calling from the ridge, the hum of crickets. For the first time since this started, I felt the ground shift under my boots. Not fear, not pressure, but momentum. Because here's the thing about lies. Once exposed to daylight, they don't just fade quietly. They unravel. They drag everything tethered to them into the open. And Karen's web, it was starting to collapse strand by strand. But deep down, I knew she wasn't finished. People like her don't surrender when the truth catches up. They scramble, they double down, they burn bridges and build new ones out of ashes. And sure enough, the next morning called. His voice carried that same predator's tone. "Brad," he said, "she's not backing off, she's panicking. And when people like Karen panic, they make mistakes, big ones, be ready." The storm hadn't passed, it was only changing shape. 2 mornings after the sheriff's visit, I woke to a sound I hadn't heard in weeks, silence. No generator hum echoing from down the ridge. No mechanical buzz from cameras watching the road. Just the soft rustle of wind through the pines and the distant call of a hawk. I walked Ranger down the gravel road, coffee steaming in my hand, boots scuffing dust into the air. When I rounded the bend, I stopped. The barricade was gone. Not dismantled carefully, hauled off. The bright silver bars that once stretched across my access road were loaded into a county truck like scrap metal from a failed invasion. The prefab guard shack still stood, but its door hung open, creaking in the breeze, abandoned like a ghost outpost. For the first time since this started, I felt my chest ease. A physical weight lifted. They built their monument to control, and now it was reduced to junk. By that afternoon, the shack vanished too. 1 minute it stood there, door flapping like some relic of post-apocalyptic nonsense. The next, it was gone like it had never been there. But the damage wasn't just to my road. The silence spread. Neighbors who once smirked from behind their beige fences now waved when I passed by in town. A few even stopped to apologize. Most didn't say a word. They just avoided my eyes, pretending they never supported Karen. Her name disappeared from HOA newsletters overnight. No more President's Corner. No more self-congratulatory essays about regional harmony. It was like she'd been scrubbed out of her own kingdom. And he made sure the victory was sealed in ink. He called me late one evening, the sound of papers shuffling in the background. "Your parcel is locked in now," he said. "Reinforced jurisdiction. We wrote it so airtight not even the boldest HOA lawyer will touch it without gloves." I poured myself a drink and laughed quietly. "So we're done." "Almost," he said. "Legally, you're untouchable, but don't forget people like Karen don't fade. They scheme. She's licking her wounds right now, but she's not finished." I hung up and stared at the tree line. Was right. Victory on paper doesn't mean peace in practice. That weekend, I put up a new sign at the county line. Heavy steel, bright white letters, private road, not for HOA use, trespassers will face legal consequences. And just below it, I cemented a post and mounted something else. A mannequin, full tactical gear, mirrored sunglasses, helmet, a little nod to their rent-a-cop. On its chest plate in bold red paint, I stenciled the words, "Second chances are a luxury, you're out of credit." Call it petty, call it theatrical. But sometimes, a message needs to be written in language even the most stubborn busybody can understand. Life began to slip back into rhythm. Ranger chased squirrels again. My students came up the hill for training sessions, rifles cracking in controlled cadence across the range. At night, I grilled steaks, poured bourbon, and listened to the quiet. But the thing about quiet, it can trick you. It can make you believe the war over when in reality it's just a pause. Because even as the barricade rotted in some county scrapyard, I could feel it. Karen wasn't gone. She was plotting, licking her wounds in the shadows. And sure enough, the first ripple came not from her, but from someone inside her own walls. Joe Carter again. The accountant, the reluctant board member who'd already slipped me the smoking gun folder. He showed up one evening, nervous as a man walking into court. "She's still moving pieces," he said, voice low, eyes darting around like he expected HOA drones hovering above us. "She's been calling emergency meetings, trying to rally the last loyalists, but it's unraveling. People are scared." "Scared of me?" I asked. "No," Joe said. "Scared of her. They've seen what you and are holding. They know the county's listening now. And they know if she goes down, anyone tied to her goes with her." It hit me then. Her web wasn't just tangled. It was snapping. And everyone still clinging to her threads was starting to feel the drop beneath them. That night, as Ranger slept at my feet and the crickets sang outside the cabin walls, I thought about the strange arc this fight had taken. A simple no to a neighbor's request had spiraled into barricades, fake inspections, forged documents, and sheriff's deputies on my gravel road. All because one woman couldn't stand being told she didn't have power over me. And yet beneath the anger, beneath the absurdity, I felt something deeper. A lesson I'd learned long ago but kept forgetting. Control is an illusion. Some people chase it their whole lives, wrapping it in bylaws and signatures, dressing it in pastel suits. But in the end, control is nothing more than fear dressed up as authority. And fear doesn't last forever. The barricade was gone, the silence had shifted. But Karen wasn't finished, not yet. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. When people like her realize they're losing the war, they don't surrender. They detonate. The quiet didn't last. It never does. People like Karen don't accept defeat, they rewrite it. 3 nights after the barricade came down, I was out on the range with 2 sheriff's deputies who booked training sessions on their days off. Solid guys, former Marines, men who appreciated the peace of the hills. The air smelled of cordite and pine sap, the echo of shots rolling off the ridge. For a moment, it felt normal again. That's when my phone rang. Unknown number, I let it go. It rang again and again. Finally, I answered. "Mister," the voice said, "this is Sergeant Walker County Sheriff's Department. We've received a request for an immediate property welfare check. Claims of weapons stockpiling, threats to neighbors, armed insurgency drills without permit. Are you available to speak with us now?" I closed my eyes, counted to 3. My voice came out flat, steady. "How many cars did you bring?" 3 units, he said. ETA 5 minutes, 1 deputy already on site. I exhaled. "Tell Badge 129 to vouch for me. He trained with me last week." There was a pause, then silence, broken only by the distant wail of sirens climbing the ridge. The deputies beside me holstered their pistols, calm as stone. They knew the drill. They'd seen enough false alarms in their careers to recognize the stink of one. Minutes later, the cruisers rolled up, lights splashing red and blue across the tree line. Tires crushed gravel, doors slammed, boots hit dirt. And there she was again, Karen, standing behind the lead car like she owned the damn department. Pastel suit sharp against the green woods, folder clutched to her chest, smirk plastered on her face. "This is the man," she said before could speak. He's running paramilitary operations. We've received credible reports. He's dangerous. He has dozens of armed men up here." I kept my voice calm, eyes on, and those credible reports came from. Karen cut in. Anonymous tip lines, HOA surveillance. I couldn't help it. I laughed. "You mean the cameras you illegally nailed into my pine trees?" Her mouth opened, shut, then opened again. Eyes flicked toward me. He'd heard enough. I reached into my bag and handed him my documents. County certifications, range registration, environmental clearance, business license. Every line crisp, notarized, indisputable. He flipped through them while Karen fidgeted, her jaw tight, knuckles white around her folder. Then I pulled the ace. "Here's dash cam footage from last week," I said, handing over another drive. "The barricade, the rent-a-cop grabbing me, the fake construction crew, all time-stamped, all uploaded to the cloud." Karen snapped. "You can't seriously believe him. Look at this place. Tactical gear, armed men. This is how militias form." "Ma'am," one of the deputies beside me said, voice steady, "we're the armed men. We booked this training ourselves, off-duty." Her face cracked. Plugged the drive into his cruiser, reviewed the footage, then stepped back out. His voice was calm, official, but heavy as a gavel. "Miss Rutland, your claims are inconsistent with the evidence. The only physical aggression came from your hired guard." Karen froze. Her lips trembled, her folder shook. "We may need to investigate your office for filing a false report," added. "For now, I suggest you return home and consult legal counsel." Her composure shattered. She flushed red, her voice rising into a shriek. "He's waging a war against the HOA. He's dangerous. He has traps, dogs, weapons." "Ma'am," the deputy cut in dryly, "you're describing rural life." The silence that followed was brutal. Even the crickets seemed to hush, letting those words land like a hammer. Karen's scream choked into silence, turned away, signaling his deputies. The cruisers idled, engines rumbling, but the show was over. Karen stomped back toward her car, folder clutched, muttering about conspiracies. But it was clear, the sheriff's department wasn't her weapon anymore. It was her liability. When the last cruiser disappeared, I stood there, dust settling, Ranger at my heel. I felt something shift in my chest. Not just relief, not just pride, but the deep, bone-deep knowing that her empire was cracking. Called that night, I told him everything. He didn't even try to hide the satisfaction in his voice. "Brad, this is it. She's running out of plays. Every move she makes now strengthens our case. Fraud, forgery, false reports, it's all stacking." "But she's not done," I said. "No," admitted. "People like her never are, but she's burning her bridges, and when the fire finally catches, she'll be the one left standing in the smoke." I looked out at the tree line, bourbon in hand, Ranger stretched at my feet. The cicadas sang. The gate creaked once in the breeze. And I realized something. This was no longer about land, no longer about a road or a barricade. This was about dignity. About a woman so obsessed with control that she tried to steal it from the one man who wouldn't bend. And here's the truth about dignity. It's not about pride or arrogance. It's about standing quietly even when the storm rages, knowing the ground beneath your boots is yours. Karen thought she could erase that, rewrite it with signatures, meetings, pastel suits. But dignity doesn't vanish under ink, it holds. And hers was crumbling. The barricade was gone, the sheriff had turned, the board was fracturing. And Karen, she was a spider with a web collapsing in her hands. The next move would be hers, but the trap she thought she'd set for me was already closing around her. After the sheriff's visit, the silence that followed wasn't peace, it was collapse. The barricade had been dismantled, the guard shack hauled away, and the HOA's newsletters scrubbed clean of Karen's name. But even stripped of her throne, she clung to the edges, pulling at whatever threads she had left. And in doing so, she only tied the noose around her own neck. Worked like a man possessed. He filed motions, added evidence, stitched every one of her fraudulent plays into a case so airtight it might as well have been welded shut. Fraud, forgery, false imprisonment, misuse of public funds, conspiracy to commit land theft. It wasn't a lawsuit anymore. It was an indictment wrapped in ribbons. Meanwhile, whispers ran through the neighborhood. Board members distanced themselves. Families who once watched me with suspicion now waved politely when they passed. A few even stopped by with pies, muttering awkward apologies as if baked goods could erase months of harassment. I accepted them anyway, not for forgiveness, but because it was proof. Karen's web was snapping and people were running from the collapse. Then came Joe Carter again, the reluctant accountant, the man with shaking hands who'd first handed me her playbook. He showed up at the tree line with eyes clearer than I'd seen them before. "She's done," he said simply. "The board's turning on her, nobody backing her now." "Are you ready to testify?" I asked. He nodded, more than ready. The trial moved quickly after that, faster than anyone expected. Maybe the county wanted to make an example. Maybe they just wanted to wash their hands of the whole mess. Either way, Karen's mountain of paperwork, the very fortress she'd built around herself, became the evidence of her undoing. In the courtroom, she still tried to smile, still wore her pastel armor, still clutched folders like they'd shield her. But the mask slipped when the exhibits began to pile up. The forged charter amendment, the vote, the environmental inspection scam, the fraudulent county grant request with my parcel number spelled wrong, each one a nail hammered deeper into the coffin. Joe's testimony sealed it. His voice shook at first, but then steadied, carrying the weight of a man who'd lived too long in silence. He laid it bare. Karen had lied, forged, manipulated, bullied, and gambled the community's money on a personal vendetta. Her so-called integration plan wasn't about harmony. It was theft, plain and simple. Didn't grandstand. He didn't need to. The evidence spoke louder than any speech could. When it was over, the judge didn't mince words. "This was a deliberate campaign of fraud and coercion," he said. "The court finds in favor of the plaintiff, damages awarded, injunctive relief granted, and further investigation recommended to the district attorney's office." Karen's face collapsed in on itself. No pastel armor could cover the ruin. By the time the gavel fell, her empire was ash. The barricade was long gone, but now the paper barricades she'd built, bylaws, letters, forged signatures, crumbled too. Her name disappeared from the community roster. Her allies scattered like rats from a sinking ship. And eventually her house went dark. No pastel suits on the porch. No SUV in the driveway, just silence. Some said she left quietly, moved out of state like she had in Texas years before. Some said the board forced her out. I didn't care. All I knew was that my land was mine again, untouchable, reinforced in ink so clear and vicious even the boldest HOA lawyer wouldn't dare breathe near it. Life returned to rhythm. Ranger chased squirrels. Students drove up the gravel road to train. I grilled steaks, poured bourbon, and sat on the porch as the sun sank behind the ridge, watching the tree line without that old weight pressing on my chest. But I didn't forget. I left a reminder at the county line. A heavy steel sign, white letters declaring private road, not for HOA use. Trespassers will face legal consequences. And below it, the mannequin in tactical gear, mirrored sunglasses flashing in the sun, chest plate painted in bold red. Second chances are a luxury. You're out of credit. It made the point. And yet, sitting there on quiet evenings, I thought about Karen. Not with anger anymore, not even with bitterness. Just reflection. Because people like her, they think control is power. They think if they can regulate the height of your grass, the way you park, or even the land you walk on, then they own you. They forget that real power doesn't come from paper. It doesn't come from signatures or threats. It comes from knowing where you stand. And me, I stood on 30 acres of stubborn hillside, built with my own hands, defended with sweat and grit. That wasn't hers to take. Not then. Not ever. Sometimes the strongest people aren't the ones who fight the loudest. Sometimes they're the ones who stand quietly, who refuse to bend, who endure every storm with their boots planted firm in the dirt they call home. That was the lesson Karen never understood. She tried to turn my land into a neutral zone. She tried to make me a footnote in her plan. Instead, she became the cautionary tale. And me, I'm still here. Coffee in hand, dog at my feet, sun setting over the ridge, free. Because in the end, dignity doesn't need permission. It just needs someone stubborn enough to hold the line. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe and join us for the next mystery on HOA Hunter Stories.